Welcome to this episode of Safe Home Podcast for struggling teens and their families finding their healing path. I'm Beth Syverson, a mom of an 18-year-old son, Joey, who's been dealing with addiction and mental health issues for several years. I'm walking beside him as he is on his recovery journey while I work on my own personal growth and healing. Today's guest is Leela Davis, a personal wellness coach from Seattle and co-host of the podcast, What I Didn't Tell My Therapist, which I was recently a guest on, by the way. The link is in the notes. She is certified as a holistic health coach in Somatic Attachment Therapy, as a Yoga of Sound and Vinyasa instructor in Astrology and Human Design, and has spent decades as a multi-passionate creative, finding healing in the process of art making and performing. Leela is here to talk to us about her experience living with and managing Bipolar I, as well as ADHD and complex PTSD. She will tell us what it's like to live with these conditions, and she will tell us what tools she's found to manage her symptoms without any prescription medication. We here at Safe Home Podcast are committed to destigmatizing mental illness, and we also love offering people practical tools. So whether you or someone you know has bipolar, ADHD, CPTSD, or just regular old depression or anxiety, you can use the tools that Leela has been trained in and that she uses day to day. Her story is empowering for those of us who feel misunderstood and mismanaged in our American healthcare system. She's found alternatives that work for her, and she helps others navigate their own wellness as well. Welcome to Safe Home, Leela.
Thank you so much. I feel honored to be on your lovely podcast. I've been binging it over the past week or so. Yeah, to prepare for your interview. And then I was just enjoying it so much that, yeah.
I'm so glad. It's resonating with you. And I don't think you have a teenager, but even still it resonates with you, which is great.
I think that there's a lot more commonalities than we realize. Yeah. It's just definitely, maybe with teenagers, It's a little more raw and a little more, there's a bit more confusion, I would say.
Yeah. It's a little inelegant when you're a teen. It's a little chaotic sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so can you help us understand what is bipolar I, or what is bipolar period? And then what is the difference between bipolar I and bipolar II?
Well, basically in the DSM-5, the main difference is that with bipolar I, one has manic episodes, which are basically high energy, high, volatility. It could be really any kind of emotion. It doesn't have to necessarily be in a bad thing. And also with those manic episodes, there's possibly a tendency toward hallucination.
Okay, so that's bipolar I.
Yes, bipolar I. And then bipolar II, which is really the first diagnosis that I received, is when you have hypomanic, which is like also higher energy levels and so forth, where it's more like a happy high, super productive and, on top of the world and so forth. But there aren't really necessarily dangerous things associated with it. You're more in control of your choices and so forth. But for me, what I was experiencing was a lot of depression. And
on the low end of things.
Yeah, that was what was really bothering me. That was since age maybe 10. I can remember these really oppressive, dark periods of time that I couldn't really, I just didn't really understand why they were.
Wow, from age 10.
Yeah.
So how can they tell between regular old depression and manic, or do they call it manic depression anymore?
That's the old diagnosis label. Now it's bipolar I or II.
Now they call it bipolar.
Yeah.
So how do they come up with bipolar II versus regular depression? It just has a little bit more of the higher energy part to it?
Yeah. I walked into the office of the psychiatrist and already had this idea that I had bipolar II from a book that I had read by a psychologist.
Okay.
Lynn Redfield Jameson, Unquiet Mind.
Oh, I know that book. I saw her speak once. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was incredible.
So basically, the difference between depression is you really don't have any switching. You're kind of just stuck in the depression, right? Or where I could literally see I'd go for 2 2 weeks, maybe a month or so of this real dark period of basically depression. But then at some point I just pop out of it. It was almost like my energies just came in and to rescue me. So that hypomanic was kind of like, the little Mary Poppins that came in and it's like, let's clean everything up and,
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And so tell me again, how old were you when you were diagnosed with bipolar II? They started with that, right?
Yes. I was diagnosed at 37. It was actually, I can remember very clearly. Yeah, it was much later. I could remember really clearly because I was living in Manhattan at the time. And I went to the psychiatrist soon after, I would say maybe within the month after September 11th. So this was obviously a really heavy time for everybody, in the world, in the country, especially in Manhattan where I was living.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
That was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. I had lost my job about 10 days previous. I was heavily in debt. I was, had been divorced. So there was a lot of real reasons for me to be depressed, but I was also like, I need help. And then I read this book, of course. So everything was coming together. And I have family history where I can point to, this runs in my family as well. So.
Oh, okay. So did the psychiatrist say, okay, here you go, here's some medicine, or did you have to kind of prove it to them?
Well, we had quite a long conversation. It was a long conversation, and I'm well educated. I know how to convince people. I can be a good salesperson. And, like everything that I had said was basically, everything made sense. So he, and he asked me all the questions and so forth. But especially that my dad had for sure undiagnosed bipolar because he was like the life of the party sometimes. And then he was a monster and he, had addiction issues and he never could really hold down a job. There was a number of different things. Like he was basically textbook in a way. So,
it sounds like it. It sounds like you might have had some childhood trauma regarding all that. Yeah.
Thankfully, my parents divorced when I was very young.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I did experience trauma. This is where like the CPTSD comes through, where there was a lot of neglect because my mother was a single mom and she was super ambitious. Mm-hmm. And I also think on her side, her whole family had this, I would say, Asperger's syndrome. They just had this very almost a flat effect in a way, didn't really understand emotions and so forth. So here I am going through these feelings, but she couldn't really respond to them, not only because she was working, but also because there was a bit of, there was a disconnect in a way as far as her trying to give me the emotional support I needed. So basically from a very young age, from as young as maybe 5 or 6, she was leaving me home alone for long periods of time. And I always have to like get myself ready for school and come home sometimes, to make my own dinner. Like first grade, that's a lot of responsibility.
Wow, that's a lot. Oh, you poor thing.
Yeah. So my mom loved me. I mean, I did wonder how much my mother loved me, but it was kind of this 50-50 thing of what I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah. When you're a little kid, you don't understand what's going on, but maybe as an adult looking back, you can see, oh, she loved me, but just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Or, as an adult, you can rationalize things, but as a kid, you just know, no one's paying attention to me.
Exactly.
That must have been really hard.
Before my parents divorced, my dad was actually my caregiver. And so he was basically mom and dad because my mother was working. Pursuing graduate work. We were actually in Norway the last the last period of time that we spent a lot of time together. So I was actually really close to him initially. And then that relationship severed, and I would visit his family in the summers and so forth. But then at that point, he was just more interested in girlfriends and drinking and partying and that sort of thing. So I was mostly close to my grandparents and so forth.
Oh, okay. Grandparents came and helped a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh boy, it sounded like both your parents were otherwise engaged, had other stuff going on.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
felt bad. So when you got your diagnosis at 37, did it help like explain things to you? You're like, oh, that's why. Or did it make things worse getting that label?
Well, it was my decision to get that label from reading that book. See, I had this consciousness of something was not quite right for a very long time. So I was trying to figure out what was quote unquote wrong with me. And so when I came across this book, it felt like eureka. Like, something I can be cured. But at the same time, or not cured, but at least there's some way of addressing what's going on, in my life, my personal experience. So I felt like I had agency. It wasn't as if somebody was yanking me into the therapist's office going, this kid's got problems. What's wrong with them? I was the one that was saying, I have problems. What's wrong with me? Or what's going on with me? But at the same time, I had a pretty good idea because I had read this book. So I would say that it was good and bad, because once I went into the office and I was open to medication at that point, prior to that, I had watched all sorts of, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and, there are films and media and so forth. And I had read Sylvia Plath and, the Bell Jar. And so there was a lot of cautionary tales around the mental health system and so forth. So I was really kind of hesitant to enter into that world and be medicated and so forth. The psychiatrist was a really nice man, and he agreed to just give me one medication, actually. So I started out with Lamictal. And for my studies over the years of medications and just listening also to other people's experiences, everybody experiences medications very differently. And so my experience was, initially, I didn't really feel like anything was that different, but slowly over time, I think it was really basically about a 6-month period that I was on it, I was sort of ramping up in energy. And the thing is, if you're misdiagnosed, so he thought that my issues were mainly the depression, which it was, but I had also had manic episodes, but I didn't recognize them as bad or anything. So I didn't really tell him the whole story. Not trying to hide anything. It was just that lack of awareness.
But you eventually decided not to do the medication. What was the turning point there?
Well, I was actually having a pretty good life. At the time, I was getting involved with activism against the second Iraqi invasion.
Oh, okay.
Because, of course, after September 11th, there was this big drumbeat for more war. And I became involved in sort of the anti-war movement within Manhattan at the time. So I was super busy. And I remember probably, she's like a sister to me, basically. She can tell me anything. So she was, I think we had an appointment, or she wanted to get together with me or something like that. And she's like, you're acting kind of weird. You're acting a little edgy. And she knew that I was taking medication. I'm like, I'm fine. And that's kind of what happens when you're in a manic sort of state. There's a lack of self-awareness. Yeah. When you're depression, you also have like a lack of self-awareness, but there's something wrong. In the manic state, you may not necessarily recognize there's something wrong. And so that's why people get really worried about that.
I think Joey's had some manic episodes. He's not been diagnosed yet with bipolar, but it's kind of on the table as possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But when he gets into his manic phases or whatever, he's kind of arrogant and like, no, I'm fine. And kind of grandiose.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to conquer the world and I'm going to be famous. And he does stuff like move to Oregon with a couple of friends with no money and no prospects, just like big giant things. Is that kind of similar, that kind of energy that you had?
Yeah, definitely. I was feeling very self-righteous when she had mentioned it because, of course, when you're doing something like activism, you can get kind of caught into that save the world syndrome or... And actually, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. There's a lot of things that were in play. And so I heard her, but at the same time, there was this sort of aggressive denial. But I did hear it. And then I believe, and the thing is, I kind of lost a little track of time during that period. It might have been about 2 weeks after she brought this to my attention. Then I remember a particular night that I was by myself in a shared apartment and I was journaling and I was feeling this weird dysregulation. It was so strange to me and I knew it wasn't right. I can't really explain to you, like, it was a knowing. I'm feeling really scared or anxious or angry and I was writing, I feel like I'm going crazy. And then I was writing that again and again, and I could see my handwriting getting more and more erratic. It was almost like a scene from a movie where you have this camera over and you just see somebody like writing and their handwriting is getting crazier and crazier. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I didn't have any family. I had friends in the area, but I didn't have any family in New York. I didn't have a lot of money and I was living on unemployment at the time. And I called my mother. She might have still been at work possibly, or just getting out of work. So I said, Mom, I think I'm going crazy. And she's like, oh no, you're fine. This is basically how she she didn't really. So I was like, Mom, really, your close to 40 daughter is telling you that she's going crazy. And I'm super self-reliant all these years, from age 5 to 37, rarely would be raising the red flag about anything. And she finally got it. I mean, it didn't take that long. I didn't have to argue. And she basically just dropped everything. She had a really serious career. She worked at a shipyard as an engineer on nuclear submarines. So that's like a serious job. So she just dropped everything. And I guess she went on family leave. And I don't even remember how long it was that she was taking care of me. But basically, I decided to just go cold turkey off of this because it was the first time that I really felt out of control. Like I felt like my body was hijacked by some strange thing. And I explained this to a cousin of mine who had had a stroke. And he says, gosh, it sounds like you went through a stroke almost. And that's when I really understood that my mother loved me. Like that was kind of a turning point at that point because she really came through for me.
Oh, nice.
And I wouldn't suggest anybody doing cold turkey at all. Like that was something that I just decided, and I have no idea about. I mean, I haven't even looked at what the titration for Lamictal is, which is a mood stabilizer. But
I was going to ask if you told your psychiatrist you did that, or did you never talk to them again? Or
yeah, I actually did. As soon as my mom got back, I explained to her that I was going to not take the medication anymore. And she was never a medication person anyway. She's very granola, crunchy type of hippie type of mom.
Yeah. Okay. So that worked okay.
Yeah, I told my psychiatrist, but he actually wanted to give me more.
Oh.
And I did try, I think it was like a Xanax or something like that to calm me down. And it was the weirdest experience because within maybe a half an hour of taking it, after we left the psychiatrist's office, I remember being in the car, and then it was if my emotions were on like a radio, like the old radio where you switch the knob and it could go back and forth, or somebody was like flipping the remote control on my emotional being, and I would be like,
oh my gosh.
I'm like, Mom, I don't know what's going on with me. I'd be like raging at her, and then I'd be crying, and then I'd be laughing, and then I was so freaked out about my lack of control of my emotional system, which had never happened that way. It wasn't logical in any way. It was a summer, and I kind of jumped out of the car. We were at a standstill. It wasn't like a running car. It wasn't that crazy. But I jumped out of the car barefoot, and I was running down the street. It was like I was trying to get away from myself.
Wow.
And I'm just like, what am I doing?
Okay, so you're like, that's enough of this medication.
Right.
This is not good.
Yeah.
Wow. So what did you do instead of the traditional meds? You found healing or recovery on the recovery path, at least from your bipolar, through other means. What have you used?
Basically, it started with me making a commitment to my own healing. So I knew that I had this condition, and I knew at one point in my life I didn't have it. And I also knew that there's periods of time of normality. So in my kind of logical brain, I figured there must be a way of expanding that balance, that normal balance. And so once I made that commitment, it was basically chipping away at all the things that were triggering, destabilizing. And so as like a holistic health coach, if I can go through that, it's this idea of like, we have these emotional states that are actually normal, but depending on what sort of imbalances in our life are going on, we can get stuck or we don't know how to sort of flow back and forth. So I was always self-aware from, say, age 12, I started journaling, and I was journaling my, my emotions. So it was a really kind of a stripping of the onion. So it's so hard to put it in sort of a nutshell, but basically it was just a revamping of my whole life. So kind of like feeding the babies that cry the loudest. So if I had a toxic relationship, maybe that was the most destabilizing. I'd be like, okay, we need to deal with that. And then the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. So the first time that I felt truly stable was when I had actually moved from New York, which is a super chaotic place to live.
Yeah, destabilizing.
Yeah, exactly. And I really felt it. Like I really felt it that I needed to move out. And I moved to Seattle, and I established healthy relationships and started doing yoga and started my own business with my partner at the time and was eating healthier. I mean, basically 4 years later after my diagnosis, that everything came together, but it was actually within a fairly short amount of time, probably within a year of like making all these changes, that I started to feel normal in the sense of that I wasn't triggered so easily, or that I was enjoying my life, that I was feeling purposeful and so forth and so on. And this was almost like accidental because I was just making sort of the life changes that I needed to make, that I felt sort of intuitively driven to do. And then my present period has been more intentional. Like, oh, this is what I need to do. That was more kind of like an intuitive following the trail, where now the last 5 years, almost 5 years of stability has been more intentional. Like having the tools and going, this is what I need to do in order to stabilize.
It sounds like you have a lot of insight into yourself, and you had done a lot of work along the way, even from a young child. If somebody doesn't already have some of those insights into themselves, then they need to hire you to be their wellness coach. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean,
is that what you do?
I think that some of the tools that really started me on my way was meditation. And there's many different types of meditation. And yoga, which can be a body meditation. The strength of it is that you're concentrating on your breath and you're listening to your body and, moving from one movement to the other and being very mindful about what's going on. And it allows you some sort of peace within your body and your mind.
So do you still practice meditation and yoga regularly?
Yeah, I also do, as you mentioned, yoga of sound, which is mantras and singing. And
nice.
This is powerful stuff that has been working for people for thousands of years. But they found that just humming calms the sympathetic system, and so there's this polyvagal theory where basically if we are calming our sympathetic or autonomic nervous system, that we can create a period of time or a pause where we can get agency over our emotional expression. And humming, singing, as Sanskrit is a language that's created specifically to reap the best benefits of sound in your body. And so,
interesting.
Yeah, there's millions of people that are Hindus, but even if you don't ascribe to that, the power of the language vibrationally can work on anybody.
Yeah, I believe that. I'm a musician, so I understand the power of sound and music and putting intention behind it. Woof. It's
exactly.
Like turbocharged. Yeah. So those things seem so simple and really mindfulness, meditation, yoga. Are you kidding me? That's what you know, but that's it, right? It's like doing that quote unquote simple things is what kind of centers and grounds you emotionally.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think the main thing that I like about using these tools is that it familiarizes yourself with how your body works.
Yeah.
For instance, the Somatic Attachment Therapy is it can be a number of things, but there's a certain type of focusing technique where you're literally starting out with a body scan of assessing how your body feels. And then with a trained partner who's just there as to witness and to hold space, you're going in and identifying what's going on, the sensations or the thoughts that come for a very brief period of time, maybe as little as 10 minutes, where you're you're doing an inquiry and identifying different parts of what's going on in your body and talking it out. And that often gives one a lot of insight and peace and integration, because everybody has battling thoughts and sensations. Part of you wants to do the work, part of you wants to sleep, part of you wants to go party. I mean, and then you have all these.
Oh, sure.
You have all these sensations, and until one takes the time to get to know oneself and how one truly, as a full being, lives in the world, then we're often battling against ourselves rather than understanding and really satisfying the needs and the desires.
That makes sense. It sounds like you just have a lot of really great tools in your toolbox. Would you ever consider trying medication again? Or at what point would you think, oh God, I guess I got to go back to the psychiatrist and ask for some meds? Or do you think that's never going to be an issue?
Well, I feel a little hesitant to say this, but at times I do take edible marijuana or drink caffeine. See, the thing is, I look at, for me especially, I'm neurodivergent, which includes the bipolar part, but it also, I've recognized that part of my volatility is related to my trauma. It's related to ADHD, which is different kind of processing of information. and that I'm very sensitive person.
Yeah.
The quality of light, how it textures, how something label on my clothing can drive me crazy. So so understanding these things and also substances, I realize their power. And so I don't really...
Yeah, you're very sensitive.
Yeah, I like friends of mine love to drink. I never really liked drinking that much. I'll drink a little bit, like literally one glass of wine will get me woo. So if I'm feeling like I'm sliding down with my mood and I'm really what's going on or whatever, there are times that I'll go, okay, I've found that edibles work. And what it does, it's super powerful. So one has to be very conscious and very careful because one can pop into a manic episode with that. That's why I don't, like, if I were already feeling like, woo, there would be no reason for me to want to take any substance because I'm already naturally high.
Yeah, you don't want to go overboard. And those edibles are very potent. It's very easy to overdo it with those. So
exactly.
It sounds like you're very careful, and it sounds like you really are aware of what's going on with you, which is really great. Yeah. And so great that you're using those tools and skills that you've learned to help other people. What does it look like if somebody were to hire you as a creative wellness coach?
It wouldn't look like one way. So I have two kind of introduction programs where basically I'm also an astrologer, and astrology has really helped me in my healing path. So that's why that's an option. Not everybody believes in it, but if that's something that resonates, that can be one entryway where I look at somebody's chart, and basically what I'm looking at sort of the energies that reveal themselves, like a blueprint in a way. And then I familiarize the person with what they can do to try different strategies and how they express themselves through their chart. Then I also have an introductory path of learning what types of meditation practices can work for somebody. So basically what I want to do is introduce somebody to the tools of awareness. So these are two different types of awareness that one is being introduced, like, oh, this is what's going on. So that's kind of the beginning. Like the person would have to decide, oh, I would want to go through sort of the meditation path or the astrology path, or maybe a combination of the two. And from that point, after a month or so, we start to really understand what issues are most important to address. Is it their diet? Is it their lifestyle? Is it their relationships? Is it their mindset? So from that point on, I start grabbing tools, or, I also am constantly looking at the internet and seeing what other things are going on there that might be helpful and steering them in those directions. So it's a very unique to each individual, basically.
You're like a concierge.
Yeah, exactly.
For wellness.
I have a bunch of tools, but there is no one way. And I would say that for people to be wary of coaches that say there's only one way. Even in my own life, there's never been one way. There's been many ways. And sure, if that particular strategy that the coach has to offer really resonates with you, go for it. But if at some point it's not really working, or you feel like you're being forced into a particular direction, and that includes any type of health practitioner, if you really don't feel like they're listening to you or working with you. And that's a real problem with mental health and emotional health, is people feel victimized by the people that are supposed to be helping them.
Yeah, it sounds like you know how to navigate and to get what you need, or to help your clients get what they need. Because it does feel like when you're in the traditional healthcare system, it feels like you're on a one-way path and with no road signs at all. And you're like, well, what the heck? What am I supposed to do now? I don't know. And so then you have these people just saying, this is what you have to do this, do that, do this. But in the traditional model, they're just kind of throwing you the same stuff that they throw to everyone.
Right.
But it sounds like you really empower yourself and your clients to find really what works for them to get their mental health in a comfortable place. Does that sum it up for you?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. What happens, what I feel like happens sort of in the standard medical system is that there's so many people coming, they don't have the time to really navigate a person's specific journey. And also even the ones that are more likely to do that, they don't have enough tools. And it'll take years. And I personally don't want to be with somebody for years. Sure, if we're working on different issues, obviously, you work on your relationship, you work on your mindset, you work on your body, obviously that could take years, but often there may be 2 or 3 issues that are really blaring that they need help. But once they get the awareness and once they have the tools and they know how to listen and how to help themselves, then they can deal with the rest of things on their own. And they could check in with me or somebody else to see if they're on track or for some support.
That all sounds really, really good. Is there anything I haven't asked you about yet that you would like to talk about?
I would just encourage people to start really listening to themselves, just to try it on, of being a little more non-judgmental about what's going on, practicing a little more self-compassion, because ultimately you are going to be the one that heals yourself. If you really want to go to truly be free and have full agency and live your full life, it is really you are going to be the one, and you need to figure out how to work with yourself. So that would be my invitation.
That's very wise. And how would people get a hold of you?
Well, I'm lucky to have my website in leeladavis.com. I got my own name. So I have that website. People can DM me on Instagram at my piece of sanity. And that's peace is PEACE as in calm,
Nice.
And then yes, hopefully you'll listen to me and Jude, who also has bipolar disorder and is another wonderful coach, life coach at What I Didn't Tell My Therapist. That's our close to weekly podcast.
Yep. I love that name.
Yeah.
I'll definitely link all of that in the notes, the podcast and your website, Instagram handle and all of that. Well, thank you so much, Leela, for sharing. It was so delightful being on your show. Thank you for coming on our show and sharing your personal experience. You're very vulnerable to come out here and tell us what it's like to live with bipolar and the other things too, and all the different ways you've learned to nurture yourself. I think that's very admirable. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me here, and I wish you the best with this wonderful show. And hi, Joey. Wish you the best too, Joey.
Thank you. Yeah, I invited Joey today, but he wasn't able to come today. But he is in and out, and I will make sure he knows that you said hello, and his heart is still with us here. And I think he will be very interested in listening to this because he might have bipolar, and he's very into all these alternative methods of self-awareness and all that. So I think this will really be good for him to hear. So thank you so much, Leela, for being here on Safe Home. I hope this episode has been helpful for you, and maybe you're reminded of some tools you and or your team can use to smooth out some of life's bumps. And since neither Leela or I are doctors, we always encourage you to get medical treatment if any mental illness might be on board. Check that out first. Make sure and find Safe Home Podcast on the social media outlets, and check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/safehome, if you'd like to become a member of Patreon so you can support our show and help us maintain our commercial-free status. Thank you, everyone. Please share this episode with whoever you think might benefit from it. Please share this really wealth of information. And Leela and I want you all to stay safe.